On November 20th, 1980, Richard Dawson's producer on Family Feud surprised him for his birthday. They flew his son to America as a gift in appreciation. Of course, Dawson burst out in tears. This was the type of humanity he expressed during his career, and yet he portrayed the perfect villain for Running Man.
It's a marvelous idea. Not my idea. It was Michelle Rothkopf's idea.
Michelle, you're a darling, and you're fired because I'm crying, and I have 5 shows to do today.
The producers of Running Man were eager to sign Arnold Schwarzenegger for their upcoming Running Man film, and in an attempt to get him, they hired his favorite writer at the time, Stephen E. D'Souza. When they asked him if he could work with their agenda, D'Souza responded by saying that he hung out with Arnold, smoked cigars with him, but he didn't bodybuild with him, and with that said, the character in the book was thin, down on his luck, and clearly not Arnold. The producers were not swayed, though, and they asked D'Souza, "Can you reinvent the character to be a vehicle for Arnold?" After some thought, D'Souza gave it a shot. Arnold and him were buds, and he knew what Arnold wanted and how to write lines for Arnold's accent. So D'Souza had a look at the book again, and had to reinvent the material for a movie, and there were some strong conclusions he came to. First, the idea of a game show that lasted a month, and the person being chased had to mail videos to a studio, which had several days' delay, needed to be condensed into a game show that was flashy and contained in a controlled area, like the game shows of the 80s. Second, he wanted the villains to be more pronounced. Killian was made into the main bad guy, rather than John Q. Citizen, that could either kill or turn on Ben Richards. He wanted the stalkers to be more interesting, like wrestlers with identities, rather than faceless unknowns ready to jump out at Ben Richards at any moment. Remember, this was a time cell phones weren't everywhere, so the idea of someone sitting in front of a television for 24 hours just waiting to see if they find anything about Ben Richards would be boring, so he wanted to snazz up the show. And with that said, the idea that Arnold Schwarzenegger, not being able to get a job, was not believable, because he could physically work the work of multiple men. So the world would need to be more Romanesque, and Arnold would be more valuable as a gladiator. As expected, Arnold was excited his friend was writing a movie for him, and the studio had little problem signing him as a result, especially when they gave him $5 million to play the part. Arnold also had total script approval, as well as D'Souza, and they were on the same page pretty much constantly. The drawback of all this was Stephen King. To make the movie an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, the story had to be changed drastically to fit the presence of Arnold, and King quickly recoiled from the film. He stated that he forbid them from using his name in any way, and demanded that they use Richard Bachman as the author credited for the movie. It was totally out of my hands. I didn't have anything to do with the making of the movie. It doesn't have much in common with the novel at all, except the title. King would even lament that his character Ben Richards was as far away from Arnold Schwarzenegger character in the movie as you could get. So it's pretty obvious King hated this adaptation of his book. D'Souza's earlier drafts were very dark, with massive deportations and poverty. During the early stages of production, many directors were eyed for the lead of the film. George Cosmatos was brought in to direct the film hot off Rambo: First Blood Part 2. Cosmatos grew up during the German occupation of Greece during World War II, and he was interested in leaning into that dark world because it was very personal for him. Some of the story's tone when Cosmatos was involved had Richard saving people from concentration camps. The world was more bleak, with roundups, and only 1% of the population lived in upscale biodomes, while the rest lived in slums. Cosmatos also devised the idea of a love interest for Ben Richards. Also, he wanted to film the movie in a very large mall in Canada that had a futuristic look, and to procure the location, it would cost a fortune. These script changes changed the budget to bulge into $27 million, but it was supposed to cost $18. The producers wanted cuts, but George kept pushing the studio because Rambo 2 was very successful, and he thought that gave him some clout. He demanded that his film's budget had to be at least $20 million, so it was on Cohen to call him and say the picture will not start until the budget was under control. Cosmatos refused, and then the studio had no choice but to let him go. Both D'Souza and Cohen confirmed these events, and Rob Cohen was quite brutal when he recalled working with Cosmatos. He was the worst experience I've ever had in the business. He was the least talented, least cooperative, and the most horrible person I've ever had dealings with. We fired him after spending $700,000 on the picture. Interpret what Cohen says as you choose, but I will note that I adore two of Cosmatos' later films, Leviathan and Tombstone, and I intend to cover both of them on this channel someday. With the termination of Cosmatos, the issue of where to film the show's hunting ground became a real big focus because they didn't want to hire another director and go through the same argument again. So they decided that a no man's land, like a ruin, would be perfect. It was a killing ground that would be walled off, and any citizen or Running Man contestant that entered that area was fair game to any stalker in the field. To have such an area could considerably help the budget because it could be an abandoned structure or even a junkyard, which could be procured pretty cheap for the production. Then they looked for more directors. Alex Cox was approached, but he was too busy with Sid and Nancy, so he passed. Then they went to Carl Schenkel, who would later direct The Mighty Quinn, but after being on the production for 2 weeks, he bowed out because he worried that he was way in over his head, since he never did a major studio film in America before. To help the situation, Cohen went to Cannes Film Festival to raise money, with the selling point that Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to be the lead. This was very successful, and Cohen stated he raised about $18 million for the film. From this deal, an agreement was made with TriStar Pictures to distribute the film, and an HBO deal was made as well. At this point, the film was more of a project rather than a concept, and things had to get moving to appease the new investors. With money in the bank, they went off to find yet another director. Next was Ferdinand Fairfax, who directed Nate and Hayes. When Ferdinand was brought in, he was eager and wanted to turn the film into a different direction with a very British tone. D'Souza stated that his direction was similar to the 1975 film The Man Who Would Be King, and whenever there was action during the game show in Running Man, it would stop suddenly for tea time, and the stalkers would sit with their prey drinking tea politely. It was stated the new direction Fairfax wanted to go was more Monty Python. D'Souza actually went to Rob Cohen and stated, "I don't think this guy is going to be lasting." Then suddenly Ferdinand disappeared for several weeks. Cohen tried very hard to find or reach him, and the producers got really worried about the situation. Finally, after a time, Ferdinand showed up to meet Cohen and stated he cracked the film and wrote a treatment. This floored Cohen because he had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and months with D'Souza developing a script for Arnold. This is what Cohen had to say.
He handed me a 25-page treatment and said, "This is the movie I'm going to make. This is just the greatest. You're going to love it. It's everything it should be." Well, of course, it was everything it shouldn't have been. And when a director goes so on the line with a vision that that's what he really wants to do, and you read it and you think, this is nothing that I want to do, and I had no recourse at this point but to say, I don't agree with you. And he says, well, I don't agree with you, so we once again respectfully agreed to disagree. So that was the third director down.
When Fairfax left, the next director was Andrew Davis, who directed Code of Silence, and would later go on to make Above the Law, Under Siege, and The Fugitive. Arnold was very enthusiastic about Andrew Davis, and when he was brought on board, this enthusiasm caused a bond to grow between the actor and the director. When Davis came on board, he started making notes to D'Souza to change the script, and one was to have Richards pick up one of the Sub-Zero's explosive hockey pucks and pocket it. Then at the end of the film, he wanted Richards to be surrounded, and then pull out the puck and kill the bad guys to protect himself. D'Souza responded quite bluntly, "That makes Arnold pretty shitty. He had this thing in his pocket for the whole movie, where the whole supporting cast is getting killed, and he uses it to save his own ass? We're not doing it." Rob Cohen, who happened to be there during the discussion, agreed with D'Souza and said they were not going to do that at all. Still, Davis added many things to the film regardless, and the more he added, the more the budget kept growing. Cohen felt that Davis also had a hard time making up his mind on a daily basis. He just couldn't commit. But the producer acknowledged that the film was getting better, so he waited to see how things panned out. Yet finally, Cohen boxed Davis into making decisions. One example Cohen made of the situation were the costumes. They had 40 to 50 different versions to choose from, and he called a meeting with Davis, Cohen, Tim Zinnerman, the costume designer, and others to decide that day during the meeting what costumes to use, because it needed to be ready for filming, and they were running out of time. They spent the day going through all the different costume designs, and Cohen demanded that everyone sign off on it so it was done. After the meeting, Cohen left feeling like something got finished completely. After a 25-minute drive, he got a call from Tim Zinnerman that the director had snuck back into the costume department and was looking at more variations for costumes. And if he started asking for variations, it could raise the budget more by having redesigns, overtime, and whatnot. At this point, Cohen recalled that he knew Davis would not work out in the long run. So Cohen covertly prepared for the inevitable. He called Paul Michael Glaser's agent, who he knew from the time he worked on Starsky and Hutch. Glaser was not only an actor playing Dave Starsky, but he directed the shows too, and Cohen liked what he did. He told his agent to not put Glaser up for any big jobs for a few weeks because he had a project that was major, and he wanted Paul to cover the job if something happened, and it looked like it was going to. So he asked the agent to call him first before putting Glaser up for another job. The agent didn't know any of the details, but Cohen saw within a few weeks that a disaster was looming, and he was trying to head it off at the pass. Despite the concerns, production continued, and the film had to be ready to shoot in September. However, it seems Arnold was more the person to cast the film than the director. During the filming of Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger came up to Jesse Ventura in June 1986 and told him there was a part for him in his new movie, and simply asked him if he wanted in it, without talking to anyone else. Jesse's response was quick.
He said, "There's a part in there you're perfect for. Would you like it? Would you like to do it?" I said, "Hell yeah, I'll do it." Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I got back to the States, before I called Vince, we negotiated the Running Man.
Jesse was so happy because Arnold wanted him in his film, and since Arnold was the star, it gave Jesse negotiating power. And since this was his second film, he got paid more than the guild minimum. Maria Conchita Alonso read the script and was asked to meet Arnold. After the meeting, Arnold casted her as well. Now, originally, Chuck Woolery was eyed to play Damon Killian, but he was just too busy hosting Love Connection and Scrabble. Many outlets state Arnold Schwarzenegger suggested Richard Dawson, not only because he was friends with Dawson, but because Arnold was a fan of Dawson's show Family Feud. However, Rob Cohen is on record stating his sister, Jackie Birch, who was the casting director for the film, suggested Dawson for the movie. One person that was picked from the film specifically was Jim Brown, because he was considered the greatest running back of all time in football, and they thought that he would be a real threat for Arnold in this movie as a stalker. According to Tim Zinnerman, there was a committee that agreed to reach out to him. Brown is effective as Fireball and Running Man, but my favorite role with him is Slammer in I'm Gonna Get You Sucker.
I don't care who follows who. If y'all step on my bunion, I'll kill both of you.
One of the best comedies ever made. I'd put it right up there with Airplane. As principal photography began on Running Man, the budget had now ballooned from $18 million to $25 million. Pretty much the sum Cosmatos asked for from the beginning. Because of all these financial woes, the original spark for the movie, George Linder, had to sell his wheelchair company to cover the overages. It was a sad situation. But Linder and the team was going to see this film through, no matter what, and that's commendable. So in September 1986, the first 3 days of shooting were spent filming the prison break scenes. Directly after those scenes, they filmed Sub-Zero's Ice Ring of Death. To save money for the film, the editor was cutting as the footage came in. The result of this is that the editor ended up calling Cohen at around 6 a.m. one morning, stating he didn't know how to cut these shots together. Then, out of the blue, Andrew Davis decided to film a scene with Arnold pocketing the hockey puck with the intention to make a final scene where Richard would use it to kill bad guys. It didn't matter that he was earlier denied this by executive producer of the studio making the movie, as well as having the main writer against it, who just happened to be close friends with the main star of the film. Within 2 weeks, the film was already a week behind, and Cohen had enough. Now, there are 3 versions to what happened next. 2 sources state that Cohen showed footage to D'Souza and Schwarzenegger, and an emergency meeting was called with them to discuss the matter to terminate Davis, and they all agreed unanimously. However, Arnold Schwarzenegger claims he was not consulted about terminating Davis at all, as he was promoting a bodybuilding competition, and when he came back, he was quite angry to discover that the director was removed. He would later state, "With such a terrific concept, Running Man should have been a $150 million movie. Instead, it was totally screwed up by hiring a first-time director and not giving him enough time to prepare." Now, what Arnold said here is in stark contrast to what Rob Cohen would later attest.
As the star, he has an enormous amount of power, and it was important that he not lose belief in the project or that we not be one of those disasters that end up in nothing but lawsuits. He was very angry at me. He felt, I think, that I wanted to direct the movie myself, which is not really true, and he felt that perhaps I had interfered too much in Andy's process and so on, and he said as much.
Cohen stated that he can believe what he wants, but the over-budget issues and lack of a clear vision cannot be ignored, because in the end it would impact Arnold personally, as well as the studio. Finally, Arnold asked him, "What do you want me to do?" And Cohen told him to watch an episode of Miami Vice, because a guy named Michael Glaser directed an episode he wanted him to watch, and that he was a shooter, which in Hollywood terms is someone who films fast. And if Schwarzenegger agreed, he would like to bring that director on to replace Davis that day. Cohen noted that he only cared about the film a year from now. Although he wanted Schwarzenegger's respect and friendship, he said he took a stand for Glaser for the film's sake. Regardless of which scenario was true, the film shut down for 3 to 4 days after Davis was removed. But Rob Cohen was ready for the situation and called Michael Glaser to direct the movie, who earlier turned it down.
And I said, "Well, how long will you shut down for?" And they said, "The weekend." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it," because it was a win-win. I mean, if the film worked, I was a hero, and if it didn't work, poor Andy was the bad guy.
He had just directed his first major studio film called Band of the Hand with Stephen Lang, Leon Robinson, James Remar, Lawrence Fishburne, and Lauren Holly. He arrived Monday morning. During his first 2 days of filming, he did the airport scenes. Directing is basically problem solving. When you come into something in the middle, like I did, your problem solving goes up about 300%. To his credit, Rob Cohen stated once Paul took over, schedules were met, resources were utilized efficiently, and the director took charge of the set. And there were no more upsets for the film in major ways. The film took 61 days to shoot and finished $17 million over budget. According to Tim Zinnerman, the film cost $30 million to make. All told, D'Souza stated he wrote 15 drafts of the script before the film was finished. For the music, Harold Faltermeyer was picked. They wanted someone who had techno sound, and currently the composer was hot because he just did Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2. He really did a good job on this score because many tracks are memorable and resonate for the film. His action tracks are fairly forgettable though, but it's still fun to listen to sometimes. Before sending the film to test screenings, a thing that was definitely cut was violence. Originally, during the prison break, a lot of heads exploded, but they knew they would get an X rating for showing that effect too much. So they only kept one in the film. Having only one was the right call, as it's more effective and shocking for the audience. When they test screened the film, the response was very positive according to D'Souza. He stated the positive response was better than the response for Die Hard, and yet the version in this screening had a very different scene. When the screening was over, survey cards were collected from around 700 audience members. Some of the cards noted confusion about the recut scenes. The confusion occurred after Amber and Ben Richards leaves Fireball. The next immediate scene was without finished effects and black and white, where Captain Freedom killed Amber and Richards out of the blue. Then the scene cut to Amber and Ben watching the footage with the rebellion members in their base. Some didn't understand why this scene was in the movie. The idea of the death scene was to shock the audience and then reveal that it was a fake-out to further show the duplicity of the show. Another problem was that Rob Cohen's contract was up, and he left the Running Man production because of a feud he had with Keith Barish, the head of the studio. Without Cohen to defend the project, D'Souza had little power to argue the need for the scene to remain the way it was for intelligent moviegoers. As it happened, D'Souza was in the studio to check on some ADR when someone stated they had to change the end reel. D'Souza was stunned and went to the producer that demanded this. It's highly believed that George Linder was the person that made this demand. But since we can only verify this one source and not two sources, we will not say it's definite, so take it as you will. Apparently, the producer in question was shocked by the confusion when he saw the cards and wanted to rectify the possibility of audience members not understanding the film. So he demanded that they change the scene so Ben Richards and Amber is watching the event as it was unfolding, so there was no shock death at all. We knew it was a fake-out right from the start. Less than 2% of the surveyed test screening attendees said they didn't understand how the people in the movie were fooled by the swerve, but that was enough to make the producers nervous, so the scenes had to be resequenced. D'Souza also noted that the majority of the confused cards were from people over 60, and that was not their target audience. But without Cohen, D'Souza was ignored, so the scene was changed to what we got in the final film. For the film's release, Wikipedia states the studio moved the movie in an attempt to be the only action film during the holiday season of 1987. But sources within the production state it was Arnold who exercised a clause in his contract to force TriStar to move the film to fall so it would not compete with his other summer movie, Predator. I guess those execs hate that Arnold had this power over them.
Don't forget to send me a copy.
With Running Man's release delayed, we will call it here, and next week we will cover the release of the film and details in the final project in our next video. For those that don't want to wait, it's up on Patreon right now, and we really appreciate those that help us there, as it helps afford making weekly content. With that said, we will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps. So does sharing. Thanks for being here.